So do you want me to do an introduction, Amanda, or just say hello, welcome to the Eep Alumni Network panel or something?
You can probably let people introduce themselves. I think that'd be
Yeah, that's what I'm
best.
gonna do.
Okay, we're live now, so you can go ahead and
Okay.
get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Eep Club alumni, the Early Entrance Program Club alumni panel. Now, and these are a group of wonderful alumni who have taken the time out of their very busy days to meet with us and to talk more about and to discuss about their Eep lives. So let's go one by one. Let's introduce yourself, your profession, your major, I guess, and a hobby that you have either while you were in Eep or right now. So James, Mr. Walker.
Yes, James Walker, started in 95, graduated in 01 as a geology major, currently work in the environmental consulting industry. I think the Tetra Tech logo is ghosting above me somewhere. We specialize in the characterization and remediation of contaminated sites. So my specialty is in groundwater fate and transport. Hobbies were video games back then, mostly playing. These days, I take apart circuit boards. Oh, it's gone. But I like to try and restore old video game systems.
Very nice. Does anyone want to go next?
So I got it. I'm Amy Watt. I started in EEP in 2006 and graduated in 2012 for a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. Since then, I went to grad school out in the Bay at UC Berkeley and got a PhD in material science and engineering. And so now I'm working at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, where I study ultra high temperature ceramics, which are materials that can withstand temperatures up to 3,000 degrees Celsius and could be used in aerospace applications and power generation. What I did during EEP, my hobby was a lot less smart than James. It was anime and television, so much television. We always had some like quality shows playing in the EEP Lounge during my time there. And we all played board games. So
Not much has changed. That's good to hear. Anyone want to go next?
I'll go next. So, hi everyone. I'm Angela Guerrero. So, I attended EEP from 2007 to 2012. So, I overlapped with Amy. I majored in biochemistry and chemistry, and I minored in music. So, I guess one of my big hobbies in EEP was to play the violin. Got more into dance after that when I went to medical school at Stanford. I ran a K-pop competitive dance team during my research year, and I am in the last year of my dermatology residency at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, where I will be an assistant professor in the fall and helping to run the residency program. So, hi everyone.
This K-pop dance group sounds like something that's a lot of fun, but maybe we can discuss that a little bit later. Who's next?
Well, I guess I'll go. My name is Jacob Lister. I started with the early entrance program in 1991, and there were a total of like 18 people. So it's grown a little bit since then. I graduated in 1997 with a degree in geography. And then actually, rather than work in geography, I went and taught math at high school level for a few years. And then I went back to school to get a law degree, which is a bit of a 180 degrees from teaching math. But I really enjoyed that actually, and I'm working as an attorney right now with the U.S. Small Business Administration, and I work on disaster loans for individuals who've had their homes or their their property, their vehicles damaged in hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters. Last year was a big hurricane year. We had 30 hurricanes or something. No, sorry, 30 named storms, but still like 15 or so hurricanes. And so there was a huge amount of damage all along the Gulf Coast down there. The wildfires in California were really severe. In Oregon as well, and so I've been helping people with getting loan paperwork processed, and getting rebuilt and moving on with their lives.
Yeah. So thank you, Cory. or Mr. O'Brien. I don't know what you guys
Hello.
prefer to be called, but
Yeah, whatever.
okay.
Yeah, hi, I'm Cory O'Brien, and I think I started in 2002, maybe 2003. Either way, I graduated in 2007, pretty sure. And I majored in English creative writing with a minor in multimedia. After that, I spent some time vagabonding around the world, driving around in a car powered by vegetable oil, because I've wanted to be a creative writer. And as a creative writer, there's not really an established career path so much. I did end up getting an MFA in creative writing from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm now located in Chicago. I've written some books of mythology where I retell mythology like it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm drunk in a chat room. Mostly now I make my living writing dialogue for video games, writing story for video games, and designing board games. I'm currently under contract with Exploding Kittens to design a game for them, and it's a lot of fun. I basically, as far as hobbies are concerned, I've spent my life just gradually turning all of my hobbies into work, which I don't necessarily recommend. It's a great way to give yourself a lot of anxiety. But as far as things that I do purely for fun and don't try and make money off of, I really like building models and doing Gundam. I have a little friend here.
Ooh.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, painted him in 80s retro colors. Yeah, that's my hobby.
That's nice. That's nice to hear. The mythology, the 3 o'clock mythology stories, I'd like to hear some of those because those could be interesting. So let's get this started. So the first question that I wanted to ask was, during your time as an EEPster at Cal State LA, did you have any classes that were memorable that you either enjoyed or you disliked for some reason? And what was the reason why it sort of stands out to you? And anyone can take this on.
Well, for me, I think the most memorable class that stood out was probably some of my first geology classes. At the time that I was taking those, I was a business major. So I started out my beginning of my academic career undecided, and then after a year or two, finally thought, okay, well, I'll give business a shot. And I started taking geology classes as part of the GE requirements, and I enjoyed it so much that I turned it into a minor. And then eventually I realized, well, I enjoy these geology classes a million times more than I enjoy any of the accounting or business classes that I'm taking. So why don't I just make this my academic career and my major? So I switched over entirely. I turned geology into my major and business into my minor, and I never even wrapped up my business minor. But that's probably what stood out to me the most.
Does anyone, Cory?
So
Yeah.
Oh. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll do it. Hi. Hello. There are a bunch of classes that I took that I really loved. And a lot of them were classes that were not necessarily related to my major. Like I had classes that I really liked in my major too. But I took symbolic logic at one point, which is absolutely not required for an English major. But I just enjoyed it so much because it taught me another way to think. And it ended up being really valuable later on when, to make ends meet, I got a job as an LSAT instructor and I needed to teach logic games. So it all worked out in the end. But within my major, my favorite class that I took was absolutely linguistics. It was not necessarily, I don't think it was necessarily even one of the classes that I had to take. You know, I had to take a lot of literature and creative writing classes and stuff like that. And that was all great. But linguistics was great because of the professor. We had Professor Huld, who I don't know if he still teaches at Cal State LA, but he knew literally everything. He knew every fact that had ever been coined in human history. And since he was teaching linguistics, and linguistics, you know, the science of language touches on everything because people have to talk about everything, he was constantly just like, the class was just dense with knowledge, just the most concentrated knowledge I've ever experienced. And it taught me to look at words in a different way, which, you know, for my profession was very useful. It just like revealed to me that like under every single word, there's so much history, there's so much story under every word that you use. And so that class definitely had a permanent effect on me. Plus, we always theorized about how he lost part of his finger and he would never tell us.
Amy?
Yeah. Geez. Okay. So from my major, my favorite classes were material science. That's where I learned about the field. And like within the first couple of pages I read in the textbook, I went, this is it. This is what I want to do. And it was just over. And I really enjoyed the topic. And then the other class was this heat transfer class. And it was mostly because of the professor who taught it. He like just distilled all of this information about how heat moves, the avenues that does it. I don't use any heat transfer concepts in most of my career, but I still remember some of the core lessons because he just did such a great job distilling the information to the extent where like I could take the tests and they were all like no notes, no help. You have to remember all the equations, and I did, and it worked. So I really appreciate and respect that professor. His name's Darrell Gillum. I don't think he's teaching at Cal State LA anymore. So sorry y'all. So yeah, professors like that are amazing. But I really also really loved the classes that I took outside of my major. I remember when I was in EEP, we were required to take a few extra general education courses. And it actually basically added another year of coursework for my degree, but I loved them. Like I was really happy that I got to take them. And there's not that many places where you could keep taking random courses to learn random things. Like my last quarter, I was in the quarter system in Cal State LA. I took 0 technical courses. It was Intro to Child Development, Gender and Science in Film, and like the history of pop and rock music in America. And I loved it. It was so fun. I just got to learn all this stuff that I typically would just have to be scrolling through Wikipedia to teach myself. So yeah, that's me.
I can talk about my favorite class in my major and outside of my major. So because I was in chemistry, I'd say my favorite series was the whole organic chemistry series, probably because all of the professors were really great. But the one who really stood out to me was Dr. Matthias Selke. I think some of you have probably taken his classes as well. He was just really engaging. And he was just, all about making sure that you understood the concepts and weren't just doing rote memorization for the sake of memorizing. And so he actually really inspired me to do some research. So I spent a lot of time in his lab, took some time to do organic chemistry synthesis research at Caltech because of that experience. Now I do 0 basic science research as a dermatologist, but I still think that it's actually really helpful for me to understand pharmacology when I look at different structures of, different things that we use and why one thing might work better than a newer, better than an older drug, why something's more selective. So it is somewhat helpful, although I know other pre-meds look at OChem a little bit less fondly, perhaps, than I did. And then outside of my major, I think a lot of my music classes were very fun. There was one on the history of jazz where we actually had to go through all of jazz from the 1920s to current day. We watched a lot of the Ken Burns documentary, and we had to memorize like 10 to 15 jazz songs every week. We'd be quizzed on it. It was actually more intense than some of my science classes. You'd have to say like, what is the title? Who was the composer? Who played it in the recording? But I felt like I learned a lot, and I can still tell you a little bit about the difference between big band, swing, and bebop. So it was challenging, but I learned a lot.
Let's see. I guess if I had to pick, I had 2 classes, I guess, that stick out. One was I took modern algebra, and it is an incredibly weird subject because it doesn't use numbers at all, and so it's just like if you had and also it doesn't use standard like addition, subtraction things. So it winds up being like if you had an operation, a mathematical operation that involved 2 numbers, what sort of mathematical world exists based on that? And mostly I think it was for the professor. And so, everybody else has said, they had a particular professor who was really engaging. And, that was Dr. Chabot. And, he was just really it's a really dry subject and it's very strange, but, he liked it. And it was a very interesting class. And the other class I took was Model UN. And it's sort of a class slash, extracurricular club. And we sort of studied current events in international relations. And I want to say in March or April, there's a national Model UN conference, and everybody goes, from all over the country. Thousands of students from different universities go to the country and then do a Model UN simulation where each student is representing a country, and they talk with each other, write resolutions, and vote on them. And the class was interesting. The professor was interesting. The professor had a whole history of being in Latin America when various coups and revolutions had taken place, and we all theorized that the CIA probably had an entire file cabinet of information on him. But yeah, and I think those would be the two classes that I really enjoyed.
I'm seeing a lot of connection with the classes in that a lot of them were because of the professor. This is something that I can relate to, and I think Amanda can relate to as well, that there are definitely classes where, because I know at least for me, one of the classes was the subject is completely dry, but the professor made it come alive. And the other one is, I can also see is sort of the general education courses is something that I know there's some Eepsters that view the general education courses with a sort of grudge. Why do we have to do this? It's not within our major, yada, yada, yada. But I feel that they can really open up a gateway. So thank you for that insight. And so let's do this next question. So after you graduated EEP, were there any obstacles that you faced within either within your profession, your career, and how did you overcome them? And what did you learn from them
I did some thinking about this because I saw this question. I was like, oh man, that's tough. That's really cutting to the core of the sort of post EEP experience. And for me, because I don't have as much of a codified career, my sort of obstacles were more internal than external. It was a lot about figuring out how to come to terms with a different way of living. Because, the nice thing about EEP and about academia in general is that you have this very clear structure of like, here's what I'm supposed to do next. And these are the classes and I have these deadlines and, everything is very well structured and that you're working towards a very clear goal, which is graduation and having a diploma. And so, for me, especially in like a very sort of nebulous career, having graduated and then needing to be in the world and being like, okay, well, I need to find a job. I need to find a way to make money. I need to self-direct and figure out like what my personal goals are and how to actually feel fulfilled. And the pull of going back to academia was strong enough that, I went back for graduate school and then I went back again and got a totally unrelated degree in American Sign Language interpreting. Which was very cool. I don't regret that at all. But in some ways that was me putting off having to figure out, what I wanted in the absence of somebody else telling me what I wanted. And that was an obstacle that I had to overcome. And, I think that a lot of what determines sort of a successful adulthood maybe is the ability to deal with uncertainty. Like the ability to be comfortable with things being uncertain and just let them be like that and continue to live your life. And so that is what I've taken away from that experience.
Yeah,
I really resonate. Oh, yeah.
Please go ahead, Amy. No.
Oh, I was going to say I really resonate with that point about the uncertainty. And even when you have a really clear career path, like you're still in a completely different environment than where you were in EEP. Like, you know, in EEP, everybody can be a lot more cooperative and collaborative, or everybody has really different interests and like really different perspectives. And like when I went off into grad school and moved on, like I found myself in kind of a weird position, since I also didn't quite know that much about the culture of academia in like the schools I was in too. And that really colored my own perception or my own experiences at that time, really early on. Since like in Cal State LA, your department is so tight knit. You know, it is not hard to get to know every single one of your professors and to have all of them know you.
I think we lost her.
Oh no.
Right in the middle of making an extremely good point.
Yeah.
I know. It's tragic.
No, of course.
Oh.
Whoops.
I disappear.
You're back.
You're back.
Yeah.
Okay, but you know, all the professors know you, and you don't quite have the same relationship when you leave Cal State LA. And I missed it all the time, and I missed the diversity that I had there all the time, and the ability to just like branch out and do whatever, and the encouragement for you to do that. Is right when I hit grad school, it's everything is this one thing, and you know, there wasn't the same kind of encouragement for you to just go and take a dance class or like, or to just learn Chinese because you felt like it, you know. You kind of have to just take on that uncertainty, just decide what you want to do and just do it.
James?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to jump on to both Amy and Cory's points about, just the drastic change. My biggest challenge was up until pretty much, right before I graduated, I didn't even think about what I was going to do with my degree. I realized it maybe 2 to 4 weeks before I graduated. It's like, wait a minute, I've got to get a job. I can't just start taking classes again next quarter. Thankfully, I was pretty lucky. Back then in 2001, the job market was pretty wide open. So threw my resume up on, I think back then Monster.com was the big resume board, and landed a job. So I was able to start the week after I graduated. But I just hadn't even given it a thought, because up until that point, everything, there was a plan and a path, and I didn't have to worry about the next month or the next quarter. It was all just sort of taken care of. So that was a big change. And then, from there, getting the job, finding, an apartment, because I had still been living with my mother at the time. So all of those big life steps that I hadn't really considered or thought about. But then I got sucked back into grad school a year later, just for the comfort of it all.
Thank you. Jacob, Angela?
I think the challenges that I face beyond EEP, a lot of them are probably more social rather than professional, mainly because I chose a path that was fairly linear. But I would say that it is a little bit challenging when you go into the quote unquote real world. When you're 18 and all of your peers are 22 to 24, it can be a little bit hard to relate to them. I just felt like when I started medical school, the people who were a bit older in my class, so the average age at matriculation was 24. So the quote older people who are in their late 20s, which is where I am now, they seemed a little bit more settled, kind of didn't really want to go out, hang out all the time. The younger students, the ones who were like 21, 22, just wanted to go to the bars all the time, which clearly I couldn't get into. And so this is how I ended up spending a lot of medical school hanging out with undergrads and discovering new activities. So maybe in slight contrast to what Amy said, I actually tried out a lot of different hobbies, and Stanford was kind of unique in that they encourage people not to physically go to class all the time. They had been doing recorded lectures even since the 80s. And so most of us would never show up to class and would instead, go take things in the education school or take classes in the business school, or some of my classmates took golfing classes or sailing classes. So, I think I did a lot of personal exploration. That's why I ended up dancing some Bollywood, some Bhangra, hip hop, and eventually landing on K-pop, was just trying out a lot of new things, because I think when you are in that life phase of being 18 to 22 years old, that's a good time just to see if there's other things in life that you hadn't experienced yet that might really resonate with you. And for me, that ended up being dance. But I do think that now, as I get older and older, the age gap with my peers becomes less and less significant. I still feel it a bit now, because now that I'm 27 in my last year of residency, again, about to be an attending and professor, I feel like a lot of my peers who are in the same stage of training, a lot of them have kids, a lot of them are very settled, which is different for me. I spend my evenings kind of sometimes spending time with my significant other, playing the new Pokemon Snap game that just came out, which a lot of the 30-year-olds I know are not doing. So I think, life beyond EEP, you're always going to be in a slightly different stage of life, perhaps from the people who are at your level, career speaking, but it doesn't mean that you can't find other people who like to do those activities. So that was kind of a broad answer, but I think there's a lot of challenges, but you find different ways of overcoming it and finding people who kind of vibe with what your interests are at various stages of your life.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel like the broad answer in this case, because it hits a lot of the aspects that I know I'm personally just sort of trying to figure out what to do, because, well, I'm not graduating next year, but it's maybe we'll come back to that. There's a question on something that I would like to ask later on. But Jacob, is there anything?
Yeah, I'd say for me the biggest challenge has been kind of internal, and that when you're in school, everything comes down. There's a test at the end, or there's a series of tests over the course of a class. And the answers, you have a right answer and you have wrong answers, and things are very sort of cut and dry, and they're very much within this, scope of a class. And after that, after graduating, going out and, getting a job, I've had several jobs as an attorney, and things aren't that neat. And so, you might be working on something, and external events and external things will have a huge effect on your results that you produce. And I could be kind of hard on myself when things don't go the way I want them to, and I have, it's not something I can necessarily control, and so it might be a little bit particular to law, because the way the legal profession is set up, you go to law school and you graduate and you take the bar, and at that point you're basically the legal profession assumes that you're a complete attorney with all the ability and the skills and the knowledge to do anything in the law. And that's not true. When you first graduate and pass the bar, you don't know anything. You don't know how to go to court, and you don't know how to file briefs and all these things that you have to do. And so, sometimes it's kind of an internal challenge to balance that, that view that once you pass the bar, you're complete and totally, professional expert attorney, with, the reality of being, when you start a position and you work for 6 months, you have 6 months of experience and you really don't know that much. Just sort of balancing that in my head to make sure that I'm, giving myself a fair assessment. Like, I've worked well on this, this project or this legal case, and things happened that were outside of my control, or that I couldn't have foreseen or couldn't have known about. and not to, let that kind of get me down. That's probably my biggest challenge.
And along those similar lines, is there any advice that to the people, to the EEPsters in your specific field? So is there any advice that you would give to them, whether it be based off something that you learned or something that you wish you hadn't learned, to either someone to an EEPster who's who's graduating into your field or just planning to go in it?
I think for the sciences in general, I'll say that I recommend, if you're going to be pursuing graduate research, to do a thorough kind of vetting of your potential advisors. I don't think I did a good enough job when I went back for my master's program. I just kind of jumped into something that was already ready for me to just, the funding was there for a research project. I didn't have to do any work, so it was a little easy. And I should have really thought about the advisor that I was going to be working with a little more, and given that some more research. It was a bit of a challenge, but I got through it all. But I'd say that's probably the one thing, is make sure that you're compatible, both with your research goals and on a personal basis too, with the person that you're going to be spending, the next 2 to 4 years or whatever of your life really tied up with.
Angela, Amy, I saw both of you guys nodding to that. Would one of you guys like to bounce onto that point?
Yeah, absolutely. That is advice I would give to anybody who wants to go into STEM, especially in graduate school. Like, you need to know who you're going to choose as your advisor, because even if things don't work out, and that happens, and there are ways that people do end up in a different group, it's a really big burden on you and your career, because it does delay how quickly you can graduate, for example. And it also is it really hurts your morale to go through that for your first place right outside of college. And also, look into more opportunities to do internships outside of academia. I took every single internship that I did while I was at EEP was in academia and other schools, and that helped me in a lot of really clear ways. But I wish I knew more about internships in national labs, and I got to learn about that working environment. I wish I gave myself a little time to do some work in industry before going into grad school. I took a chance and did an internship in industry during grad school, but my advisor wasn't thrilled about that. It worked out for me long term, and we were on good terms now, but that was a fight that really didn't have to happen. So take more opportunities outside of academia just to see where you could end up before you make that decision.
Mm-hmm. And then I'd say, adding on to that, if you're in any of the STEM fields, I think in addition to identifying a great mentor and research lab to join while you're an undergrad at Cal State LA, I think those summers away from Cal State LA are extremely valuable. I mean, I learned a lot of skills by going to Caltech, by being in an organic synthesis lab that was just very serious. It was a lab where people were, I'd say, fairly thrilled to be there 6 days a week, working 70-hour weeks. And at the time when I was 16 and a little more naive, I thought that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. But I learned a lot of really valuable presentation skills, things that seem so minor. Make sure when you're drawing your structures, everything should line up. All your arrows should line up. This is how you get publications submitted into and accepted into Nature, Science, and Cell. Just things that maybe I hadn't thought about quite as much when I was at my Cal State LA research lab, but going to a lab where they're regularly publishing things on that caliber, the atmosphere was different. People were working hard. They were all really nice and supportive. But if you were giving a presentation in a big lecture hall, I remember the postdoc who worked with me, he even told me, this is how you should hold your laser pointer. Use 2 hands so you don't shake. Make sure you talk through your slides. Talking between slides makes you sound more professional rather than pausing between every slide. And that's just the kind of mentorship that you can get from a very serious lab. So I'd really highly encourage everyone to take that kind of opportunity. And then because it was funded by Amgen, which is a big biotech company, we actually had a day where we got to tour the Amgen facilities in Woodland Hills and learn about how R&D works in pharma and industry rather than in academia. And it's very different. There's a lot of emphasis on being high throughput rather than just trying one or two things and thinking very deeply about them. They also brought in outside speakers to talk about the transition from academia into pharma. And clearly, while I ended up not going that route, I'm very happy that I at least had that exposure.
Yeah. So Jacob, I know you didn't, I don't think you had the intention of doing law when you were an undergrad, but can you sort of speak on that? Because I want to go into that field, and I always joke that it's a soul crushing profession. So I want to see if that's true.
I think it can be. And I know we've had a fair number of Eepsters go into law and hate it. I enjoy it, honestly.
Jacob, what do you think of our classmates and friends over the years who have enjoyed it? What aspect of it do you think appeals to the group? Because you're right, we have had a few people who burned out on it.
What appeals to the group?
Or what do you, just off the top of your head, what do you think?
The part I like is sort of it's a lot of stuff is very step by step and very carefully done. It doesn't sound interesting, but it's a lot of dotting your I's and crossing your T's and making sure everything is just just the way it's supposed to be. And like Angela, you mentioned, this is how if you're giving a presentation and keep talking through your slides, don't pause every time you change slides. A lot of the law profession is kind of like that. You're working on these little things in order to make your overall legal presentation seem very correct. Basically, if you're presenting in front of a judge, you want to get everything right. You don't want to have misspellings on your briefs because judges think you're careless, and if you're careless on your spelling, maybe you're careless on your legal research as well. So you don't necessarily think, oh, it's just a typo or something. It's no big deal, but it matters. And I think there's a certain appeal to me of that. I know different people who've gone into law like it for different reasons. I think some of the reasons people well, I don't know where I was going.
Maybe we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Maybe you can give you some time. So, Cory, is there are you freelance? Kind of from that perspective?
Yeah. I'm extremely freelance. Yes. So, other than not having health insurance most of the time, what I can offer as the representative of arts and the humanities on this panel is that what I think about a lot. I think a lot about what was the advantage to me of having gone to EEP. And I've thought a lot about it over the years, especially because as someone who is in creative writing, I didn't have as much institutional support within EEP as people who were, going into science, going into law, going into medicine. Those are three kind of main things that come out of EEP. And so mine, I was left to sort of wonder sometimes, like, well, why did I do this? Like, if I wanted to be a writer, why did I do this? And with all the years of hindsight, I think the conclusion that I've come to is that what I gained from going to EEP was time. And in a different sense than I think we sometimes think about it with EEP, like a lot of times I think it's easy to fall into the pattern of thinking about EEP as a way of accelerating. You get done with law school or med school or grad school faster because you skipped high school. And that means you can start your career faster. which means that you can publish faster, which means that you can make money faster, which means you can die faster. Like it's just like a race to the finish. But like what it has been in practice for me, since I don't have some of those same, career carrots dangling, is that I have realized that by skipping high school and finishing college early, I didn't jump into something else immediately after that. I just had that time. So like when I graduated, I was like 18, 19. And then I went to one of my professors and I was like, should I go to grad school right away? And he was like, don't go to grad school. You're gonna go to grad school for creative writing, and you're gonna wear your black turtleneck, and you're gonna write some really emotional poetry. You're 18, 19 years old, man. Go do anything else. Get a job in construction or what, like just anything. Just do anything. And that was a great license for me, because I was like, okay, great. I'm gonna go hitchhike around Europe. I'm gonna go, fix up this car and drive around this car and see the United States and live in weird trap houses with strange people that I don't entirely regret knowing. But the important thing, at least for a career in art, and maybe this is just like a thing in general that helps make people more well-rounded, is that like, it is like technical skills are fairly accessible to learn. You can learn technical skills pretty much anywhere to a greater or lesser degree of success. You can learn how to draw, you can learn how to write grammatically, and even you can learn how to write persuasively, just in an institution, taking a few classes. In my profession, a thing that was pointed out to me by one of my grad school advisors is like, as a writer specifically, it is much less important that you know the mechanics of writing, and much more important that you've spent time developing an interesting internal world that people are going to want to read about. And that takes time, and that takes it, and that time was some of what I was given by being an EEP. And so, yeah, my advice or my encouragement would be to, rather than just trying to rush ahead to some kind of, uncertain conclusion, to use the time that you have been gifted by being in this program to just do something wild. Just do something wild. Don't get killed. Don't get addicted to drugs, but like do something wild. And build your own personal mythology and your own internal world with that.
Gotcha. Thank you. So I think the final sort of EEP related question that I would want to ask before just diving into.
Really quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask the audience if you have any questions right now. You can go ahead and put that in the chat so that we can have it after this question, I guess, after this next round.
Oof.
I think
I assume she disconnected. That's okay. So the last question I have for you is, how do you feel that EEP has shaped you into the person that you are? And this one's also might require some pondering.
You might need to repeat that for Amy, since she.
Yeah. So Amy, the question was, how has EEP shaped the person you are today? The one that is presenting in front of you.
Okay, I have an answer right now. Because you know what? It was people like Cory and like my friends from the program who made that point that EEP wasn't a chance to just accelerate and advance. It was a chance to get time to do cool, fun, interesting things, to learn things that would be outside of whatever would turn into money for you. It was just a time to become a more well-rounded person. And like being in high school for me would have been just trapping myself to the system telling me what are the things I need to do to be a better college student. But I knew I wasn't happy in that system, and neither did I want it to do that. So like, that's why general education courses, I thought they were kind of annoying for a little while, but in hindsight, I was so grateful for them. And like being around people that would tell me like, no, just enjoy being here. Like and like make the most of the time that you have around people like other EEPsters that are like-minded, intelligent, and smart, can say things that are well beyond anything that you would hear like when you're just at work sometimes, like that sort of wisdom can come even from some bratty 14-year-olds. So like, and one thing that I really made sure to do for myself when I was going through the program was it took me 6 years to graduate. And at some point I did feel like, oh, wow, this is so long, but like it was worth the time. I graduated when I was 20 and I took a gap year where, well, I still ended up doing research, but like I wanted to take a year off from like that whole treadmill of academia and STEM to just do random things. One of the first jobs I wanted to do when I was done with college, I thought, man, it'd be cool to be a truck driver. And I found out that I couldn't because you have to be 25 to be a commercial driver.
Oh, wow.
Jeez.
Yeah, right. Fun fact. But yeah, like you don't have to go straight to grad school. You don't have to go straight to med school. No problems with people who end up doing that. That's fine. But be really thoughtful about that decision. Don't do it because that's what's expected of you. Do it because you want it to, because you're smart enough to do whatever you want to do.
Gotcha. Thank you. Anyone else wish to jump in next?
I think I got some good and some bad from it in terms of how it shaped me. I think I'll start with the bad so I can end on a good note. I developed a certain level of hubris and perfectionism from being included in the early entrance program. I'm like, I'm a special boy because I went to college early and it's impressive. And it led me for a while to put, an undue amount of pressure on myself because I was like, oh, well, I did this thing and I've been ordained to go out and change the world. So why am I not president yet? And that took some getting over, being out in the wider world and putting things in more context. But I think the real value that I got was just being made aware that certain things exist and are possible. So like being within the community of EEP and being around so many intelligent and interesting and engaged people really set my standard for like the kind of people that I want to associate myself with in the world. And those people are few and far between in the actual world. Like EEP is a filtering mechanism for really cool people. And so, I'm lifelong friends with a number of people that I met in EEP because there is a special quality to some of those people that you meet, but that's not the only place that you're going to meet them. It just means that once you've done that, you sort of have like a wizard vision that allows you to identify those other people in the wild. Like every once in a while, I will meet someone and I'll be like, oh yeah, this is a person. We are going to get along. That I wouldn't have that without EEP. I don't know. I think I probably would have settled for a different class of friendship than what I now know is possible.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sort of
adding on to that, I would say I made some of my very best, like genuine friends within EEP, people that I met in Provi Summer that I still keep in touch with really regularly to this day. So I think the people you meet are some of the, one of the most important things about EEP. But I think one of the other challenges is that as you leave the EEP bubble, you realize that most people out there are not EEP-like. Most people are not, highly driven and super laser focused on whatever it is that they want to do. And I think even within the field of medicine, this is something that a lot of my mentors talk about. For those of us who are residents, we've spent over a decade and a half trying to get this point, trying to be the best dermatologist or whatever specialty you're in that you can be. When you go out into a practice, the physicians are kind of operating like that. They're, for the most part, excited to see patients. Everyone's trying to do the best that they can. But then the people that you work with, your staff might just see being there as it's just a job, right? It gives them health insurance, it pays the bills. They're there from 8 to 5, they punch in and they punch out. And you have to learn how to work with those kinds of personalities too. And that's something that I think took some time after leaving EEP. Again, just realizing that not everyone was passionate about their job or their career, but that it's really valuable to interact with all kinds of different people because you can learn other skills from them.
Jacob, James?
We all agreed with it. Yeah, just all of the above. Some of my closest friends to this day are folks that I've known now for 25 years, I think, which is terrifying. But yeah, and everyone is. I mean, it's a different group of people that you're going to be. Your classmates and your friends are in EEP versus the folks that you meet out in the real world, or however you want to refer to it. And you will identify with some folks over the years, and I think that is one of the nice things is you do develop that kind of radar, and you can really pick on who is going to be interesting pretty quickly, just based on early interactions. But on a downside, I will say that, and my wife has pointed this out, that developed a little bit of an arrogance almost sometimes that comes off occasionally, just due to the time being around so many impressive people that you almost unintentionally sort of take credit for things that other folks have done. But something that I try and just tamp down when I realize that that's coming out of me. But that's just life. We all have our imperfections.
Yeah, I think I would just echo the same thing. I have lifelong friends that I met when I was 14. You'll meet friends. You'll develop a kind of a strange bond from being in this very unique program, and it'll stay with you. Yeah.
I mean, some of those connections are stronger than some of my family connections, I'd say.
Yeah. Same here.
It's interesting.
I made one of them my family, so.
Yeah. I was gonna say it if you didn't.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
We have some questions.
So on a more personal basis, and I'm not trying to digging up all your personal details or not, but Cory, I want to start off with you. So can you tell us a little bit more about this vegetable oiled power car and this trip around Europe or whatever that you did after EEP?
Jeez, I thought you were gonna ask me I thought you were gonna spring some sort of oh yeah, and can you tell me about the time you did heroin? I didn't do heroin, by the way.
What?
But, so let's see. Yeah. So after EEP, I went and I spent about 4 months hitchhiking around Europe. I'm walking a pilgrimage trail in Spain called the Camino de Santiago, which just runs from one end of the country to the other. And that was, one of the most deeply affecting experiences of my life, doing that. And came back to the States and decided that I had traveled and I had met a bunch of people who their whole life was traveling. And I was like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want that to be my sole source of meaning. And I also don't want to leave the country again until I have a better understanding of my own country. So, I was tired of driving around Los Angeles, always worrying about gas. So I went on Craigslist and I found a car that ran on vegetable oil, used vegetable oil that I could get from restaurants. And this was before, now they've locked down all of the oil dumpsters, but at the time it was sort of the Wild West because they hadn't figured out what it was worth yet. And so I had a filter and I would just pump oil out of these dumpsters and filter it into a barrel behind my house. And then I eventually got set up and I made a mobile filtration system with a stand and some buckets and some jugs. And I took it across the country with me. And I would go and knock on the doors of Chinese restaurants and be like, hey, do you guys have some oil I can use? And so, yeah, it allowed me to, fairly cost effectively travel across the country because my oil was my fuel was more or less free. I would sleep in the back of the car when I didn't have any place else to stay. It was a 1987 Mercedes turbo diesel station wagon. You've probably seen them driving around LA because Los Angeles is where those cars go to retire. They don't like cold weather. Which I found out when I made it to Virginia in winter and the car froze up. The fuel froze in the lines and I had to pay $1,000 to get it towed back to Los Angeles cross country. That was the end of the trip. I had intended to go all the way around and come back, but I just came back from there. But it was a great experience. I got a lot of good stories out of it. Met a lot of cool people, practiced my juggling. Yeah, I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything.
Ryan,
It's
we
very
have a lot of questions in the chat actually. I think we should get to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Charlotte asks, or actually first George, he asks a question for Jacob. As someone who desires to go into mathematics teaching, how did you answer the "why do we care" question?
Ooh,
That's a hard one.
yeah. Why do we care? You know, when I was teaching math, I told my students sometimes I'd say, you may not go out and use the quadratic formula, but the things you're learning in math, at least in high school math, are you're learning to follow sort of a formula that you'll take things step by step to work through a problem and get an answer. And that's kind of that's actually a really important thing to have out in the world. And you also learn to think about things kind of in a certain logical manner, so that like in geometry, you have to do a lot of proofs, and you're sort of walking through something step by step. So you start with a couple of facts, and then you work through, and you have these theorems that apply to these facts, and ultimately you prove that if whatever is whatever you're trying to prove, and that helps out in the real world, because you're often trying to make you're trying to persuade other people of things. You're going to try to persuade your boss that you deserve a raise, and they're sort of useful skills like that. Even if you're not in math, you're taking some of these logical skills and applying them elsewhere.
Gotcha. Amanda?
Yeah, that's great. And then Charlotte also asks, have any of you read any good books lately?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I read 2 great books recently that are very different from each other. One of them is called Quit Like a Millionaire by Christy Shen. So recently I've been really getting into reading about this movement called FIRE, Financial Independence Retire Early. And this book is about this young woman who was raised in poverty in China, and how she ended up retiring at the age of 31 from software engineering. So I guess it was kind of interesting in that in some ways she's a little bit Eep-like, developed a laser focused goal, achieved that goal, and then moved on to the next thing. So it's just something that was interesting to read about. Also, she has a different approach to how to select your career. Like, think about how you can make enough money to support the things you're very passionate about, which leads me to my second book that I just read. I actually just read an entire book about beginning ballet. I started taking some adult beginner ballet lessons, and it's called the Joffrey School's Ballet Fit book, where it's targeted towards adult beginners. Most professional ballerinas have to start at the age of 8, but it's kind of fun. It takes you into a completely different world. It also has a lot of structure to it and explains a lot of the French terms that if you show up to an adult drop-in ballet class, they might otherwise not explain. So those are my top 2 book picks right now.
Anyone else have any books?
I read books. I got some books. I read a few books recently, some of which I didn't like, so I won't recommend those. But one that I really did like is called Piranesi. It's by the same woman who wrote Doctor Strange and Mr. Norrell, but it is much, much shorter. And in my opinion, just like much more, concentrated and affecting. It's an incredible book. Highly recommend it. And now I'm also finally reading House of Leaves, which I had avoided for a long time because everyone who had recommended it to me was a hipster. But no one told me that it was a horror book. it was like a cosmic horror book that puts Lovecraft to shame, which is good because Lovecraft deserves to be ashamed. He should be rolling in his grave. He's a terrible person, not a very good writer. Those are my top 2 picks, House of Leaves and Piranesi. Who's next?
I have a 3-year-old, so I haven't read anything in a couple of years, at least.
I read.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I read Moby Dick not too long ago. Book about a whale.
I hear that whale is a metaphor.
Yeah. The whole book is just a metaphor. I really enjoyed the book. I know, like, so high schools make people read it, and everybody hates it as a high school student. But I just read it recently, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm reading right now is this book, The Anarchy, about the East India Company in the British East India Company sort of went and took over India, but I'm only partway through it, so I don't know. Well, remains to be seen if I will recommend it, but so far it's pretty good.
Gotcha.
So I started reading a series of books called the Tensorate series by Neon Yang. They actually are amazing Asian queer writer, and they wrote stories in this genre called the silk punk genre, which I've been really enjoying. And so all of their writing really is imagines sort of a world where you can kind of choose your gender later in life, and that's kind of your coming of age. And like the setting is really like it's this fantasy Asia. So I've been really enjoying it. It has a little bit of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I really liked that when it was coming out. And so seeing that in like a really cool fiction that's really queer was something that I really enjoyed. Another book that I've been really enjoying that's like nonfiction is called Beautiful Souls. It was like a book that was recommended by Rebecca Solnit, and I love her writing. And I was kind of going through a crisis of faith in humanity. And so this book was all about like stories of people doing the right thing and the brave thing in really tough geopolitical times. And it really outlines like what kind of person this was. And it was always just a regular person with a really good conscience and enough bravery to do the right thing. And so seeing stories like that over and over again was something I really needed during, recent times, Yeah.
One more that your first one reminded me of is Gideon the Ninth, the tagline of which is lesbian necromancers explore a haunted Gothic mansion in space.
Oh, that speaks to me.
Yeah, it rules. It rules pretty hard. You're going to have to send me the title of the first one you recommended too, Amy, because that sounds great.
I got you. Yeah. And I need to keep House of Thieves in my head.
Maybe
Okay, we'll talk after this.
Maybe you guys can compile a list of the book stuff, and then we can
that would be great
for everyone. Yeah.
Are there any?
All sound good. Oh, were there any more book recommendations people had? Or if not, Nidhi has a question for Angela. Do you have any advice related specifically to medical school, like things to do during undergrad, figuring out which programs would suit you best, or being successful in that program or / medical school?
I would say number 1 and number 2, get as high of a GPA and MCAT as you can. Do good research, get a lot of really good letters of rec. I know that sounds incredibly generic, but they are kind of the most important thing towards getting into medical school. And then once you get to medical school, or once you've gotten accepted into a bunch of them, it's hard to say, which programs are necessarily better than others. If a school has more of a name brand to it, it does open up a lot more opportunities for you. You'll also find that a lot of the top ranked schools, so for example, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, don't even really do grades, because if you have the top X% of people, what's the point of pitting them against each other? But if you go to a for-profit school in the Caribbean, they definitely try to stratify people, and that can cause a lot of stress. It also becomes a lot harder to match into a residency program. So there is a range in terms of tiers of medical schools and how easy or difficult your life can be afterwards for getting into residency and fellowship, but it would depend on what track you want to go into. So if you wanted to focus on community practice, you don't need to go to the best academic medical center that has a very high research output. However, if your goal is to become a future department chair, to become a really expert medical person in the World Health Organization, then it does behoove you to go to a school that has a little bit more brand name recognition, just because they have a few more connections.
That's great. Okay. And Kyle asks, aside from what has been said earlier today, if you go back in time to your past self who was just about to graduate from EEP, what piece of advice would you tell him or her moving forward? Maybe you guys will need some time to think about this one.
So right before you graduate.
I would just say you have more time than you think. That's what I would tell myself. Is like my entire 20s were characterized by me thinking that I was going to die when I turned 30. I needed to get everything done. I needed to get everything done in my 20s. And now I'm 30 and I'm like, oh my God, I have so much time. This rules. That like if it's a really hard thing to internalize. You're going to get told it so many times after you graduate, because you're going to graduate so young. And as you go through your 20s, everyone's gonna be like, oh, you're so young, you have so much time. And it's going to be so annoying to hear that. But like, I like to think that if I had come back in time and I had met myself as a time traveler, I would believe what I had to say, because it probably, it takes, a theoretically infinite amount of energy to travel through time, and to have spent that to deliver that message probably means that it has some weight to it. So I might have listened if I had heard it from my time traveling self.
Well, you'd be dumb if you didn't, because you had a time machine.
Right.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, you don't have to do everything before you turn 30. You can't even be president until you're 35. So, and considering what presidents we've had recently, you got time.
Yeah.
Like, just like enjoy the time that you have right now for what it is. Don't keep thinking about what you're going to be tomorrow, like, as that being the only thing that's worth your attention. What's worth your attention is the relationships that you make right now, the fulfillment that you feel out of the things you do right now, and how that helps educate who you can be tomorrow. But that's not the most important thing. That one's third for a reason.
That's great.
What else?
If anyone, okay, I'll just move on to the next question. Juan asks, any advice regarding accepting/growing from failure in the context of EEP's hyper-intensive academic environment, as well as more generally after EEP?
I think failure is going to happen in life. I think that's one of the things that you encounter when you move on to the professional environment, that, it's, I think, has been discussed before, but it's kind of out of your hands to a certain extent sometimes. But as long as you take, lessons away from it is the key, is, learn something from your failures and apply them to your future actions. That's what I've tried to do over my years, and it seems to have served me well for the most part. But they're inevitable.
I think they're not only inevitable, they're really useful. Like failure is extremely useful. You think of if you wrote a computer program, right? When do you want it to crash? You want it to crash during the syntax phase, before you try and run it and it eats up all the memory on your computer and turns your hard drive into slag, or before you show it to your boss and they're like, what the hell did you write here? You want it to fail early so you can see what's wrong with it so you can fix it. Failure is an opportunity to correct things, and you don't want to just sort of silently coast by without failing until suddenly you find yourself in a situation you're completely unprepared for.
I think it's also good to create environments where it feels safe for you to fail. So what I mean by that is, I think I probably have had more failures outside of my professional life. So again, dance. I showed up to a hip hop audition, not ever having done any hip hop in medical school, for like the most competitive dance team. I don't know what I was thinking. I was very sore for days after that. But because I went there and I failed so hard, I met some other people who were in the non-audition team who told me, you look new, you should come join us. We are for complete beginners, which is a nice way of saying, hey, you suck, but you can get better with us. And, you know, it was in a very non-threatening way, and kind of tagging on to what I said earlier. When I said get as high of a GPA as you can if you want to go to medical school, that does not mean only take courses in STEM or only take courses that booster your GPA. You can also take things pass fail. So let's say you want to do some crazy tennis class or something you're really bad at, like me and dance, just take it pass fail. So you can still have that experience and quote fail in the sense that you're not getting an A+ for once in your life, but you're still learning a lot from it.
Anyone else? Okay. Amanda, are there more questions?
Yeah. Brandon asks, I feel like skipping high school has given me less structure, but more freedom to diversify myself as a person. How do you all continue to grow as people outside of your main career?
New hobby every year, just about. I like to just learn new things as they pique my interest. So, you know, previously it's been home brewing or auto mechanics, or I like to tinker with things. So building, woodworking, that kind of thing. Now it's electronics. So just continuing to investigate things as I learn about them and teaching myself. It's just an ongoing process.
I was going to volunteer for things that you think are interesting. You know, there's tons of community organizations and all sorts of stuff that, you know, if you show up and you say, I'm gonna, you know, I'll work an hour on the weekend and do stuff for you. What do you want? I've taken time running elections. Actually, this is something that you can do. You know, they happen every 2 years, or a little more often than every 2 years. But the you know, someone has to work the poll books, and so when people show up and try to vote, someone has to, you know, check them in, and they pay you actually. it's not that much, but you know, yeah, volunteer, do stuff outside of work and school. Have fun.
Go to therapy.
Yeah, I echo like just. Oh yeah, definitely. Therapy rocks. Like, yeah. Do you want to continue? I'm sorry. I think
no, that's it. No, just go to therapy.
Yeah, it's freaking amazing. Okay, I mean, going to therapy for me, like, helps me unpack a lot of stuff in life and really think deeply about how I want to keep living it. And so that really helped me really broaden up and be really thoughtful about how I want to spend my time. So I still throw myself at hobbies. I try to volunteer for organizations. Like I did a little bit of stuff for like a group that does murals around the Bay Area. That was cool. And then I went to a brisket party. It was awesome. And like, yeah, just talk to as many people as you can that are, and they're all going to be different from you, and live and talk to them as like your true self. Sometimes it might mean that you might want to focus on some part of you that's not related to EEP. We're all EEPsters here, so we talk about that all the time, but like outside of this, you're something other than child prodigy, and you're going to grow out of that eventually. So you better have other things that you'd like to talk about by then, right? So do as many things as you can that kind of scares you.
Yeah, I really like just trying random new things. So I don't know if any of you have seen the show on Netflix, but it's called Blown Away, and it features competitive glass blowers, and each episode has a different challenge, like to make a functional piece of glassware or to make something that somehow embodies all of what you are. So that one was a bit more serious, but one of these challenges featured an educator from the Pittsburgh Glass Center. So my significant other and I were like, well, where is that? We're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we realized that it was 5 minutes away from my apartment. So we went and took a 2-hour flame working class where you learn how to shape glass. And we made these little heart magnets, and you can melt in glass frits of different colors. So now we have these really cute glass heart magnets that we put up on my refrigerator. And we kind of just pick that out as something new and spontaneous to do. Neither of us had any experience with glass, but Netflix made it look like a lot of fun. So we went and did it.
That's really cool.
Gotcha. Thank you for all that. Amanda, are there any more questions? And
Yeah. Before doing that, though, I had a personal question for Angela. Since I've heard like the medical school and just the medicine field is like really, I guess, you're doing a lot of work. How is the work-life balance in terms of finding hobbies and stuff to do? Yeah.
I think work-life balance is, this kind of catchy buzzword that people talk about constantly in medicine and in a lot of other high-stress fields as well. I feel like I stayed fairly well balanced. Again, Stanford was a very pass-fail place where they kind of had a bare minimum of things you absolutely had to do, like you have to show up when we have live standardized patient actors because they're real people, so you have to be there in person. And I think regardless of which medical school you go to, it's important to figure out which things do you have to, be physically present for and give all of your attention to, and which things do you have to can you give less energy to? Because no one has an infinite amount of energy or time. So there are some things like our nutrition courses. I understand that they're important, but I'd be lying if I said I was fully paying attention and not working on practice questions, which I thought was a better use of my time during some of those courses. So learning how to multitask well, really having things on your calendar. So I think what really surprised me, so when I ran my K-pop dance team, again, it was mostly undergrads, and a lot of them were new freshmen who had zero concept of time management or work-life balance. And so I found myself being a little frustrated, being like, well, I blocked out Fridays from 8 to 10 p.m. and Sundays from 2 to 4 p.m. for this dance team, and you all want to perform, but you don't all want to show up consistently, so what are we going to do about that? So we all had this long chat about how if there are things that matter to you, you have to block it out on your calendar. And that's how I learned that most of them didn't even have calendars yet, which to me means they weren't very busy, as 18-year-old freshmen tend to be. So I think you can do anything you want to do, but not all at the same time. And that was one of the most important pieces of advice from one of my close advisors in medical school. She helped to run some of our preclinical curriculum. She was also a hospitalist, so she worked in internal medicine, seeing patients as inpatient, but she was also a mother to 4 or actually 5 children between the ages of 5 and 15 when I knew her. So she said that in her early career, she spent a lot of time sitting on panels, doing a lot of research meetings. And then as she moved up and up, she had to cut back on times from committees to spend more time with her kids. So you don't have to do everything all at once. Kind of like what Cory said, you don't have to do everything in your 20s. Like, and for me, I'm going to be associate residency program director in the fall, but does that mean I'm going to stay in academia forever? I don't know. You can only really plan your life out for 3 to 5 years at a time. And what balance means in one season isn't going to be the same thing it means in the next season. So when I was an undergrad, the period of time when I was studying for the MCAT, most of my time, 80% of my time was devoted to studying for the MCAT. I actually remember dropping my music lessons, which was a big deal at the time because I took music lessons from when I was 4 to age 16. Same goes for when I studied for, the USMLE Step 1 exam or Step 2. So balance looked a little bit different then compared to what it looks for me now. Now I work, like 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. or 5:30 p.m. on a long day. Derm's pretty great. And then the rest of the time is now my own. So balance looks very different for me now than it did a couple years ago. But again, I'll be taking a big board exam in 2 months. And so my balance will look different again. So it's always changing. There's not really like, oh my gosh, I've achieved work-life balance and this is it. I'm set forever. You have to constantly reevaluate.
And it's sort of like to bounce off of that. Like I said, I'm interested in law, so I wanted to ask Jacob, how was law school? What did you do in order to what were the sort of steps that you took to get in and sort of find a career that you like, especially within the bounds of law?
Right. So law school is a very competitive place, sort of by design, and all across the country, the law schools, the first year of classes is basically the same for everyone, regardless of school, and all the law schools, or at least most law schools, I think, grade everybody on a curve, which is kind of harsh because it means you get a bunch of people who are really smart, competitive, and you give them C's, and then let's see. So that's, after the first year, you get to sort of take other courses that are based on your interest. A lot of law schools have clinics where you sort of get some practice. You actually work with clients, and so that's a good experience. Let's see, law schools. All law schools have a number of journals, and they mostly publish long articles by professors at various schools. But working for the journals is kind of a prestigious thing. It's kind of it looks good on your resume, I guess. So the way I went about going to law school was probably the worst way, which is I decided I wanted to go to law school, and then I just studied for the LSAT for a bit, and I took the LSAT in, I think, February, and it was at a point where it was at the end of the acceptance cycle for law schools. And so they'd already filled up most of their classes, and they have a few slots left, and they're willing to take people. The better way to do it is to plan to apply it's in the fall, in September or October or something, when they first start accepting applications for the next year. Just because you have a better chance of getting in at a top university. Law school is also really expensive, so make sure you want to go into law first before you go to law school, because it's a lot of money to spend on something if you sort of do it because you think that's what you're supposed to do, or because you're not sure what you want to do. And also, once you go to law school, you sort of wind up as a lawyer. It's a little, if you want to change professions after that, people are like, why do you want to quit being a lawyer? Even though a lot of lawyers burn out, and there's a lot of problems with the profession. Let's see. And then again, make sure, in law school, make sure you find some balance, because it's very competitive, and you're going to know that there's other people who are spending studying from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. at night every day, and figure out a way that a schedule that works for you. You have to do some studying, obviously, but make sure you get some time with friends and some time outside and so on.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you. Amanda, are there any more questions from the chat?
Yeah. Brandon has a question that's a bit personal. So he says, or he asks, has being younger than your peers affected your romantic relationships in any way once you're outside of the EEP structure? And what about in starting a family?
I would say, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I would say it affected me when I was like, I don't know, 23, 24, where it was like, if I wanted to date someone who was the same age as me, they were in a very different place, like educationally and professionally. But like it gets less and less significant the older you get. Once you get to the point where everybody will have reasonably finished their education, like the distinctions between ages tend to dissolve really rapidly. And then, and at that point, like around that point is about around the point that you would start thinking about, starting a family anyway. So it doesn't really, I think, affect the timeline for that at all in my experience.
I agree.
Yeah. And like, even though I've had a partner from EEP, like I'm a woman in a male dominated field and all of my hobbies are very male dominated. Like I do martial arts and Muay Thai and then like watch anime. Like it's like, so, I know I've gotten that kind of attention from people of all age ranges, no matter what I was doing. So that also changes the dynamic for me personally. Of course, nothing happened for all of it because I already had a partner. That's just how it is.
In the beginning of med school for me, my classmates used to tease me very lightly because they say, hey, you're as old as some of the high school seniors at Palo Alto High across the street. You could go and date one of them. And I said, absolutely not, for many, many reasons. But, I think that is maybe in some ways it's challenging too as a woman, because if you feel like you're too academic levels above people who are the same age as you, again, medical school versus high school students or early college freshmen, it can be challenging to relate to people sometimes. And I also found that, once I was in residency and initially starting to date other people, it can be a little bit awkward when they realize, wait, you're 23 and you're a physician. Like, how did that happen? And some people get weirdly intimidated by it. I'm also staunchly child-free and not everyone has to start a family just by virtue of growing up and becoming an adult. Just wanted to put a plug for that out there. That is a decision you can make. You don't have to start a family and have children, and what a family looks like to you can be different. It can be you and a significant other, and pets and or plants. And so the way that you interact with others, it can evolve over time. And I realize that if someone is intimidated by what I've achieved at my age, then it's not the right person for me. I'm very lucky. I have a significant other now he's actually in the MD PhD program. And the funny thing is that we end up hanging out with a lot of medical students that I also teach. Again, this is probably going back to that theme of I tend to hang out with people who are the same age as me, but are in a level of training below me. But it has worked out for me socially so far.
Is there anyone else who'd like to add on to this, or has everything pretty much been said? Amanda, are there any more questions?
No, there's actually no more questions in the chat unless anyone wants to ask a few more. It's been an hour and a half, so I'm not sure how much time you guys have, but
yeah. So
yeah.
I guess while let's see, I'm taking a look at the list of questions here. Probably should have done this before, but oopsie. Let's see. Amanda, do you have any questions that you would like to ask?
Sure.
Or, yeah.
Let's see. I guess I'm curious because I have a creative writing minor, and Cory, you said that you did a lot of creative writing. So how did you go about like maybe building your resume as a freelancer, and putting that out there for other companies?
That's been a really interesting process for me. I think the right way to do it is not the way I did it. Would be to look at the things that you read that you like, and see where they're published, and just start, as much as possible, submitting the things that you've written to them. If Statement Literary Magazine is still at Cal State LA, you can rack up an early couple of publications submitting to them. That's a good place to get started. And so building up publications, especially within the field that you specifically want to be working in, is, the main way that you build your resume for creative writing. I did some of that. I published in Statement. I published in a couple of things online. But I stumbled into video game writing because I was lucky enough to live in an era of the internet where everyone had their own blog, and I had my blog where I was doing my mythology stuff like I was drunk in a chat room, and that generated a certain amount of notoriety for me, self-publishing that stuff. And I was approached through that by a video game developer who wanted me to write for a game called Monster Prom, about trying to smooch monsters at a high school. But they're all over the age of consent, canonically. To be clear, the ages are given at the beginning, and it's all totally cool. But he liked my writing, and he was like, "Oh, do you want to do this video game thing?" And then that turned into my video game resume for now I work in video games, because Monster Prom did pretty well, and I went from there. So it's really just like any way that you can get your work out there, whether it is, self-publishing on a blog or on, now blogs are less of a thing. So like, there are people who do really well doing microfiction on Twitter, for example. There's some people who that's their inroad into success. But just any way you can get your words in front of people is going to help you build that reputation, because really all it takes is somebody reading your work and being like, "Oh, I have a job for that person. I like their aesthetic." So not just any of your words, but specifically words that are the type of words that you would want to be writing for someone. Because for art, it's terrible. Like people can't just look at something and be like, "Oh, you're a good writer, so I'm going to hire you to write something that needs a good writer." People want you to have already written exactly the thing that they're looking for you to write, to prove that you can write that thing, which is never going to be exactly true, but you want to get as close to it as you can.
I see. Thank you. Also, I just want to say I played Monster Prom, and I'm a huge fan. So,
of course.
Thank you, and I'm sorry.
It's good to know something that you hold near and dear is made by a fellow Eepster.
Yeah.
It's a cool feeling.
Yeah.
It's a cool feeling for me too.
Okay.
So I guess let's. I guess.
Question.
Oh, go ahead.
Mon asks, as the Eep Club president-elect for the coming year, were there any aspects of Eep Club or specific events facilitated during your time in Eep which you found exceptionally meaningful?
Oh man. I was Eep Club president. Oh yeah, Catalina.
But it doesn't exist anymore.
I know.
So.
Yeah, you guys don't do any of the overnight trips anymore, do you?
No, we still do them.
You do?
Not during COVID, but
oh
we do.
yeah.
Yeah.
we do Big Bear, and we try to do Catalina still.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those were the big ones. Just the overnight trips, getting to do. The thing that we would do sort of outside of the auspices of the program that was really iconic of Eep for me was what we would call Eepovers, which was you would just go over to someone's house and it would be like a sleepover, except that nobody slept. You would just like play video games all night. And like that to me, and that's, Big Bear and Catalina and whatever, those were sort of sanctioned versions of that same experience. And I valued that more than anything. I was not a good Eep Club president.
You had a good team. I remember.
Yeah, no. Everyone else was great. and I was very good at delegating to them. That was my one skill. But
then you were a good
That's an
EEP Club
important
president.
Yeah,
then.
like,
Then
what are
you were
you
a good
talking
EEP Club
about?
president.
I remember the prom, the end, where all the music was just like Tunuk Tunuk Tun and like the Pokemon.
Yeah, just like 60 to 70% memes by volume.
Yeah, that's basically it. We hired a DJ just to play memes at us.
I don't think that's changed much. Any other events?
Laser tag I thought was great. I'm actually trying to see if we can get our residents to go play laser tag with me as future assistant program director. It's like a bonding activity some point this year. So I just love laser tag.
You know what I miss that you guys can't do now is Fright Night. Unless you brought Fright Night back. Do you have Fright Night?
Yeah, we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yes.
We do it
Oh,
at
man.
class.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I remember I was there for the last year when they did it in the student union, and like different student groups would get assigned different parts of the route through a haunted house. And like we had set up this whole thing in the basement. We had Alex Stevens writhing around in a glass case full of simulated meat. And then they made us move out because it was an earthquake threat. And then we never did it again. It was a bummer.
That's great.
So if you could figure out a way to bring that back.
That sounds really
Truly legendary.
But it has to be Alex Stevens specifically.
Yeah, it has to be Alex Stevens. I have his number if you need it. If you need a guy to ride around in a glass case full of simulated meat, there's no one better.
We'll look into that. And Juan, you should be taking notes here. Juan should be taking notes here.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Milton's watching this, but he should be as well.
Yeah.
The next administration will have
Simulated meat.
yes. So I guess if they're Amanda, let's do final call for questions, because I have a meeting at 3:30 and I want some.
Yeah.
So I guess the final question I have sort of for you guys is, will EEP sort of, and this is something, a question that's a lot more spontaneous. How will EEP affect how will your EEP experiences affect your outlook on where you're going towards your next chapter in your life? If that makes any sense.
Well, that's a deep question. First of all, like Angela says, you can't really plan things out more than like 3 to 5 years. And that's something that I've had to learn over and over again, is all of my best laid plans have always gone to that went beyond that time frame, just went out the window really quickly. And I had to learn that a lot of times in short succession during EEP. For how that experience affected my life long term, like my personal life, most of my friends are through EEP. And all the people that I called during shelter in place, like when I needed, someone to talk to, were people that I knew through the program. So I know all of my closest friends and all of my closest people are through that program. And that affects how I think about things, because that's, like we've all been echoing, that's a standard of people that we expect out of our lives. And what it means for my career, well, when I try to start something or do stuff, I start out with telling people that I am a high school dropout with a PhD, and that helps with getting money. So there's that. But ultimately, I've grown out of being that weird child prodigy thing. I just try to be more proud about the stuff that I've done as a result of it. What I've been doing. And I use that to sort of help educate what I want to do next. It matters, but it's not the only thing about you that matters.
Yeah, and I think as life goes on, I think EEP provides, a good foundation to build on those experiences and to overcome challenges. But as the years go on and on and on, as my gray beard demonstrates. I think there's a less of a direct influence, and the support structures are still there. Like Amy was, saying, all those friends and relationships are still there, but the direct impacts are maybe minimized over the years, and it's more just the general foundation that the experience sort of established and that I've built on over the years that has more of an impact on things, on challenges and life events.
Very much like a butterfly effect type of thing, where it's like, at this point, there enough dominoes have fallen that nothing that happens, in the next stage of my life is directly because of EEP. Like EEP is not the proximal cause of anything that is happening now in my life. But, you go back enough dominoes and it's like, oh, well, the people that I met, caused this, and the way that I was socialized caused me to make this decision back then that now has carried forward. I think Amy is absolutely right that the social groups that we've developed, that is the thing that is most straightforwardly carried forward for me. The friends that I still have, and not just the friends that I still have, but generally the way in which I value people, not in terms of being part of a clique, not in terms of being part of like a large and overarching group. That's not the way that I end up experiencing belonging, but in terms of finding individual people who really, who I really connect with. Because EEP was a small program and, everyone was so, full of energy and so unique in terms of how they related to people, that has, shaped the way that I socialize, in the rest of my life. It's not about faceless masses of people. It's about individuals, whether they're people that I still know from EEP or people that I'm meeting now. So I carry that forward. But a lot of it is just like, oh yeah, well, I mean, it's impossible to imagine a world where I didn't go to EEP and all the things that happened after I went to EEP. Like, I wouldn't have traveled and I wouldn't have started this blog, and then I would have, I wouldn't be working necessarily in video games right now. Maybe I'd be a computer programmer, who knows? It's impossible to untangle that counterfactual.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's kind of a counterfactual question. If I had gone to high school, I figure I'd probably be dead because I was a really annoying 14-year-old and someone would have just killed me. The thing I got from EEP is a really close group of friends who I've kept up with over the course of multiple years.
Decades.
Decades, yes. Decades now. As James's gray beard will evidence. And maybe something that goes with that is I tend to view everyone as, smart and capable and driven. And a lot of other people that I work with really aren't, or that I, if I'm doing work for them as an attorney, they're not. I kind of have to remind myself of that. It's sort of an odd side effect of being an EEP.
Sure.
I would say something that I definitely took away from being an EEP. I always wanted to do everything as efficiently as humanly possible. I was that person who was taking like 22 units a quarter when I was explicitly told not to. So I've always, tried to find a way to cram in more things into a specified amount of time than perhaps some would think humanly possible. And I feel like I still carry that out into even how I run my clinics. So I've become, especially in this pandemic, my department's de facto tech person. We use an electronic health record system called Epic. Epic is a platform that was built largely for people to do billing on, not necessarily to practice good medicine on. So I think about, because in some ways, again, I like being efficient, so that makes me seem lazy sometimes. I want to do things in as few clicks as possible. But then I find that people in my department really appreciate that. So they like the fact that I'm youthful and interested in learning new things, because I think the people who are getting closer and closer to retirement get less excited about learning new things. So something that I've really tried to carry into, I guess, post-EEP life, adulthood, whatever you want to call it, is trying to always have that sense of wonder about learning new things. So we have something called an away rotation in your last year of residency, where you can spend a month doing whatever you want with whomever you want. And so I actually took a whole like 60 to 80 hour programming course kind of through Epic. Usually you'd have to go all the way to Madison, Wisconsin, but because of the pandemic, they did it virtually. So I think EEP really inspired the love of learning within me. Had I stayed in high school, I don't know that I would be that excited about like learning new things and really getting into them in depth, because I wouldn't have had that opportunity to the same degree. You know, most 15-year-olds don't get to take a deep dive into organic chemistry or physics just because. Most of them have to do all of the usual, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. courses rather than only taking 2 courses in a day and structuring the rest of your day however you want. So I think just having that mindset of I still think, again, probably a little bit of that EEP hubris. I think I can learn anything I set my mind to doing, maybe not at a professional level, but I feel like I can become knowledgeable enough about anything. So I just keep trying to learn new things. And I think that's a skill that would, serve any EEPster well later on in life.
Gotcha. Well,
Yeah.
Amanda, should we call it an end there?
Yeah, we'll call it an
Or is
end.
there?
There's no more questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we have a lot of thanks in chat for you guys. So thank you so much for taking time and giving us all this wisdom. And yeah, I will end the stream here unless anyone has anything last things to say.
I would just say if anyone has additional questions about being pre-med, feel free to email me. Amanda has my email and can distribute. I know some people have questions they don't want to ask in a big group.
Yeah, and if there's any other questions for any other academic backgrounds, Amy and I are the EEP alumni chair and co-chair respectively, and so we can, find those resources if anyone has any questions and direct them as needed.
Yep, same. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ditto for art
James
stuff.
has my email.
What do you?
I know I'm specifically focused in creative writing, but if you're into any creative discipline, I can definitely find someone.
Awesome.
Once again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to answer all these questions, and it was an informative, enjoyable, and insightful for me, and I hope for everyone else who watches this. Thank you once again.
I'll end
You're
the stream
welcome.
here.